Welcome everybody to our CanAge first set of conversations. And we're so delighted that you had a chance to join us today. CanAge is engaging in a series of what we think are quite critical conversations really in the time of COVID-19, where issues about older people have taken a never before more important turn. Very pleased to be sharing this opportunity with some of our partners today. We have with us today representatives from the Alzheimer Society of Canada, Dementia Advocacy Canada, Grier Training for Dementia, and the Dementia Alliance International. I just want to start with a few housekeeping details, and the first is really to introduce our panelists today. So my name is Laura Tamblyn Watts. I'm the CEO of CanAge, which is Canada's National Seniors Advocacy Organization. We're also joined by Grier. She's the founder and managing director of Grier Dementia Training, and she's also a fellow of CanAge. Joining us also is Kathy Barrick, the CEO of the Alzheimer Society of Canada. We're also so pleased that Kathy is a fellow of CanAge as well. Lisa Poole joins us. She's the co-chair of the Dementia Advocacy Canada. And we also are delighted to have Christine Thelker from Dementia Advocate. She's a member of the Dementia Alliance International and a person who lives with her own experience of a dementia diagnosis. We're going to be having quite an informal conversation today, and I do want to start off with a few of our housekeeping details. And so as we go through this CanAge conversation, I know that many of you will be very interested in making sure that you have an opportunity to share this webinar with others and to make sure that you get the resources, including a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be posting and sending afterwards. So part of our housekeeping is to assure you that you certainly are getting some additional information and additional resources after this. We're going to be talking about advocacy. And in order to just kind of set the stage for that, we're going to be talking a little bit about what does advocacy mean, and then launching an entire series of conversations about advocacy and how to do this thing that we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to quickly remind you for housekeeping details that during the course of this webinar, the microphones and video of the attendees are turned off, but we have an open chat, and we invite you to use the chat function to talk to panelists who will be keeping an eye on it. I'm also very pleased to introduce to you Brett and Megan, who are policy officers at CanAge. They're going to be on the chat and on the Q&A box and making sure that we get the questions that you have, and that they will be inviting those questions and offering them up to our panelists today. So be active, be engaged, use the chat and the Q&A, and we'll make sure that those questions get to each of the panelists. And so our agenda today is to just have an open roundtable discussion. We're going to be talking about how we can set the stage for better advocacy in Canada. We'll do some Q&A with everybody there, and then we'll make sure that you, as we wrap up, have an opportunity to connect with additional resources from each of the groups. So I'm going to invite our panelists to make sure that they turn on their cameras at this point, and I'm going to welcome each of them to the stage. Thanks so much, Kathy. And we have Lisa, we have Kim, we have Christine. Thank you. For those of you who may want to just have the panelists on the screen, you may see some additional people signed in. Those are our team members. Do feel free to just to click on the top right hand, and you can actually hide non-video participants. So if you want to make sure that you do that, and you can also click on speaker view, and then you will only see the one person speaking and the other people who are there. So I know all of us is really getting used to Zoom, but I just wanted to offer that. It's great to see some friends already on our chat, and we'll make sure that we engage actively on our chat. So I'm going to start off at the very beginning. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a couple of minutes top line. We talk about this thing called advocacy. Some of us say that we're advocates, but we're not always talking about the same thing, and that's okay because it means different things to different people, and it really can be different as well as what kind of level we're talking about. So I'm going to ask each of our roundtable as an icebreaker, what does advocacy mean to you? And Christine, it's so important to have your voice at the table. Is it okay if we start with you? Just a couple of minutes. When you think of advocacy, what does that mean to you?
Great. Good morning. Thank you. And welcome to everyone. For me, advocacy is about empowering people. It's about using my voice to help ensure that those who no longer can use their voice still get to be heard. That the people who are making decisions about policies, who are doing research, organizations who are, under the Dementia Alzheimer's umbrella, are those people in the positions that are putting their policies and procedures in place, are actually understanding what it is we need. So that's what it is for me. It's about helping ensure that things are not just being done for us without us. That's the real key message.
Thanks so much. Lisa, can I turn it to you? What does advocacy mean to you?
I think advocacy is speaking up about what's right. Self-education is first. You need to make sure you know your facts and that you've done some investigating about what resources are available, because like the boy who cried wolf, people will stop listening to you if you send them on a wild goose chase. But once you educate yourself, you want to start creating awareness and educating other people, because people often don't know what they don't know. And I like to believe in the inherent goodness of people. And a lot of advocacy is really just helping people understand, what you need help with and speaking respectfully for what's right.
Well, and there's so much of that need for respect, particularly if you're looking online and you're looking at, Twitter and other forms of, easy communication back and forth. There's a real lack of civility sometimes in what we self-perceive as advocates. Thank you so much, Lisa. Kim, over to you. When you think top line, icebreaker, what does advocacy mean for you? Oh, Lisa, sorry, Kim, you need to unmute yourself. Hold on. There you go. Oh. There you go. We're so used to that these days. And I'll invite our panelists to, if they want. There you go. And do feel free to, you can keep yourselves unmuted as panelists if you like. We can have an easy back and forth. So Kim, what does advocacy mean to you?
Advocacy for me really is about change and making things better. I have, one of my core beliefs is everybody has the right to a self-determined life, but not everybody has the ability to get their point across, make change. And so I think advocacy is really, how do we engage people to, as Lisa said, do the right thing and really get out there and make a change, whether it's on a personal level, a local level, or nationally. I had a friend say to me throughout the nursing home and the COVID crisis, nursing homes weren't really that great to begin with, so it's not a surprise that they went downhill so fast. And it was like, wait a minute. So we were okay with nursing homes not being good enough to start with. And so it's just things like that of helping people look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a shift change for you.
That's and it's helping people sort of transform what they think, like, again, what you don't know what you don't know. So how do you throw ideas at people to say, okay, listen, this is kind of what's happening, and how do we make a change, and here's why it's important.
Thanks. Kathy, you've dedicated yourself to advocacy, and both personal but also a systems level. So when I'm talking about advocacy, what do you take that to mean? What is it for you?
I'm going to pick up on what Christine talked about, and I think for us at the Alzheimer Society, a large part of our advocacy work is actually listening. So making sure that we're hearing the voices of people with lived experience, and then from that we then look for areas in the system that we think we can have the most impact. So for us, our advocacy efforts are really looking at a broad system. in ways that, you know, perhaps one small change could impact several people. But I think listening is actually the key point for us at the Alzheimer Society, to make sure we're actually speaking on behalf of the people that we are advocating for.
You know, it's so important to understand that people have advocacy at different levels as well, isn't it? Right. And so part of what we're talking about is when you're self-advocating, or you're advocating at a local level, or you're advocating for an entire system change. Let's talk a little bit more about that in terms of kind of how do you start, and you know, how do you start activating the desire to help people at different levels. It's certainly very different if you're trying to, you know, yourself raise your own issue versus you're trying to get the federal government to move an entire system from point A to point B. So I'm going to ask, you know, each of you to kind of weigh in a little bit at the different levels that you do your advocacy, and maybe weave in a little bit about the work that you do and the organization you're with at this time. So it's a little bit of an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you in your advocacy are doing, and a little bit about kind of what the organization. And maybe at this point, I'll go back to Kathy, because you were just raising the issue about, you know, you were looking at it from a listening point of view, but also a systems change point of view. So for you, kind of talk a little bit for people who may not be as familiar about what the Alzheimer Society of Ontario actually does, and then what level of advocacy, and I'll use that because I think you work at a variety of levels. What kind of levels of advocacy are you working at the Alzheimer Society of Ontario?
Sure, thanks, Laura. So very similar to what Kim identified, we believe that people living with dementia have a right to a very full life, and that a diagnosis of dementia does not at all indicate that life is over. So we, I would say, do advocacy on a couple of levels. So a good portion of the work that we do as well is on behalf of caregivers. So not only do we listen to people who have a diagnosis of dementia, but also people involved in their life who may take on the role of helping care for the person as the disease progresses. So we try to look, so we do listening first. So we listen to what people are struggling with, areas of the system that aren't working so well. Obviously, of late, long-term care has been a very important topic that we're beginning to advocate for. Well, we've always advocated for it, but increasing our efforts in that area. So we then take the feedback we hear from people that we work with and try to consolidate that into really high level, sort of 2 or 3 really system impact initiatives that we think the government would be amenable to hearing. And I think that's a really important point, that we have to phrase things in a way that that helps the government achieve their mission. We then actually take that high level advocacy framework and we actually then roll it back down to people with lived experience. So I would say we do a little of both. We do organizational advocacy, where I go to Queen's Park and talk to the people who make those decisions, but probably just as much, or if not maybe even a little bit more, we actually roll it down to people in our communities and equip them with the tools to go and talk to their MPPs, because honestly, personal advocacy is very, very effective. It's people who vote, not organizations. So we try to help the people that we work with have the tools to go and advocate on behalf of themselves and other people as well.
So you're hitting at a bunch of different levels, really. You're empowering self-advocates, you're helping to leverage personal stories, and you're doing that at a systems change level. And part of what I also heard is that you really do need to be able to speak the language of government, which is, and if anyone who's ever worked with government knows, it's not really like how we talk to regular people. You have to be able to focus in on their particular key issues and so on. And so I think one of the things that we've heard from folks is that we should do some skill building for how to actually interact with government and how to be able to pitch the information in a way that they can catch it and that they can move forward. So I think that that's going to be an area that we work on. So we've got the sort of the systems piece here. Christine, is it okay to go back to you and draw on your experience? So when you're doing your personal advocacy, can you speak a little bit about your person who's living with a diagnosis of dementia? Can you speak a little bit about how you do it, what you find is effective, and maybe what some of the challenges that you face are?
I think speaking from the heart is the biggest component as a person living with. When you're advocating, it can't be scripted. Yes, we spend days and weeks writing our speeches when we're at conferences and things to prepare them, but they are all coming from a very personal place, and we make ourselves very vulnerable to be able to share that. And there's a lot to be learned in that from people who are willing to step up and do that. It comes at a risk, because oftentimes if we're not following a script that a group or organization want us to, we are sort of banned, stepped over type of thing, which is a real problem, because a lot of those, whether it's government or a group or an organization, what they have to understand is that if they truly are wanting to advocate and help make changes for us, the people living with, they have to be prepared to let their guard down and hear the things that they don't want to hear.
Mm. That's really important, because when you're hearing those personal stories and you're dealing with a person who may have some challenges in memory and so on, it's how do you leverage your own personal stories, but at the same time, maybe not feel like you're being co-opted into something, is part of what I hear you say as well.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And that, and so you take a big hit emotionally on your own well-being as a person living with, when you put yourself in those roles, but you always do it. I always say it isn't about me. It is about me, but it's not about me. It's about the greater picture. It's about all those other people, and making sure that the changes that come for everybody coming behind me, because the numbers are increasing, are done in the best way for all of us, so that we can live a good quality of life. Because for us, we're not looking for quantity, we're looking for quality.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you, Christine. Lisa, talk a little bit about kind of the Dementia Advocacy Canada, and where are you in this push-pull around kind of the different levels and types of advocacy that you engage in?
It's actually a very interesting question, because there's opportunities to advocate, as Kathy said, local, provincial, national, international. And in some ways, I think to be an effective advocate, you have to have an understanding of what's going on at each of those levels to really understand the issues. Like, I think understanding the facts, you have to almost be the best educated person in the room about your problem. So there's facts, and then you also need compelling personal stories, as Christine said, because that really, sometimes facts are so general and they're really important, but it hits home, like, we're all humans and we can relate viscerally to a compelling personal story. And so understanding how to tell these personal stories in a way that is succinct and expresses them in, like, as I think it was Kathy said before too, in the language of government. They're busy people, they don't have all the facts, they don't know everything, and so it's part of an advocate's job is to help them understand the issues. So I'm just going to hold up a card that Dementia Advocacy Canada created, that we sent to every federal MP in Canada. And so we included some facts and figures about dementia, because when we are reaching out to them, we don't want to cause them more work. We want to do the homework for them and say, here are the numbers, here's what you need to know, that provides the framework for the personal stories.
It is that, remembering that we're so focused often on our issue or issues, that, other people have other jobs. And so sometimes it's hard to remember that, your issue is one of 1,000 issues that's coming in front of them, particularly if you're asking for funding. That's especially true because, and many of us are engaged in pre-budget submissions, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. And that's where, organizations from across the country, August 7th, by the way, you're not too late, and we'll put the link up in case you want, is asking all of Canada, all Canadians, where do you think that we should have investment? And so we're busily writing yours. Kathy, I know your pre-budget submissions are out and in, and you're competing against like mining corporations and educational systems, and you're competing against whatever other challenges right now. And let me tell you, COVID-19 is really a key challenge. So if it's a choice of going to you or the hospitality industry, if it's a choice of going to you and foreign aid, right? There's many, many issues that we need to do. So we need to make it as able as possible and as doable as possible, right? Because otherwise they're like, I have a million other competition points for my time, attention, and money. Why is yours most important? And that's one of the pieces that we really have in terms of CanAge. So we're a National Seniors Advocacy Organization. One of our values, like we wrote it into our values, is collaboration. And we have said that essentially we won't really do anything alone. Like if we're all alone, it means that maybe we're not understanding what the issues are. There should be already issues and people that are advocates and champions. So one of the ways that we engage with advocacy is just like to look out and find who else is out there. Because a leveraged voice, 10 organizations saying one thing, is often more powerful than the opposite, right? So if you can only find even one or two things, but you have lots of people who agree on that, in our experience at CanAge, that brings a weight to and a gravitas to it. Kim, let's just pick up on that for you. So part of what your organization does is help people to understand the lived experience of a person with dementia, but you're doing that also to individuals and policymakers and to people who are supporting people with lived experience. So what role does that play in your advocacy?
That's a great question. A lot of my advocacy is really individual, one-on-one. My organization does a lot of dementia care training, and a lot of what we're doing is trying to bring back humanization in dementia care. And so a lot of my individual advocacy and with our group is to really try to get people to understand, this is a person you're looking after, and let's look at this from a different perspective. And you never know what impact you're going to have on that one individual or the care team, or who they're going to go to and say, oh my goodness, I heard this the other day, and this really changed how I view a person living with dementia. And so a lot of my advocacy is really sort of on the interface between the direct support workers and viewing a person with dementia as a person with dementia.
Let me pull on that a little bit, because even within our shared concern around dementia, there's a million things you can advocate for, right? You can advocate for adult day services, you can advocate for caregiver support, you can advocate for research, you can advocate, and we have, of course, had a national dementia strategy passed. I can tell you one of the things we're advocating for is them to actually move forward and do the things that they said in the strategy. But, I'm going to turn to you, Kathy, for a minute here. The Alzheimer Society of Ontario, I know, is involved in many, many things, but to actually decide, you got to come to some strategic decisions about what to prioritize, maybe your top 3, top 5, however. What is the process internally at the Advocacy Society of Ontario that helps you crystallize what your top asks are?
I'd say a couple of things. So one is urgency. So how dire is the issue that's on the table? But probably over and above that, it's actually the breadth of impact we feel we can have. So to Kim's point, our last year's pre-budget submission, or I guess it was this year's, for the 2020 budget, actually asked for a huge investment in training for long-term care staff in treating people who have a diagnosis of dementia. Because we feel with, and Kim, I'm sure you can attest to this, when you train one person on how to appropriately provide care in a very dementia specific way, that increases the quality of life for countless people in the system over the lifetime of that particular care provider. Another top priority that we advocated for most recently was the First Link program, which is an Alzheimer Society program, but beyond that, it's really about helping people navigate the system. So we know that, even those of us who are in the system all the time, sometimes it's hard for us to figure out what door to go through. So again, by advocating for system navigation, we are hoping that it will impact the largest number of people. So it's really, I'd say, urgency and impact that help us define what it is we're going to be talking about.
Let me just kind of pull that same question over to Lisa, if I can. How, with Dementia Advocacy Canada, and you're part of a greater international alliance as well, how are you engaging in your processes to decide kind of what it is you're going to advocate for this time, this year, this focus, this campaign?
Well, that's a really great question. And so pre-COVID, when we started out, we had Zoom meetings actually, where we had lots of heated conversations about what people's priorities were. And then we sent out a survey to verify what we thought we had heard and gave people another opportunity to select their priorities. And so this is the backside of the other card that we also sent to government officials, is we narrowed down to our top 3 priorities. Because there's no point in giving someone a laundry list of 100 things that you want to change. People just get overwhelmed and probably you put it aside for later. But one thing is best. 3 things I think is okay. And we have constant conversations reevaluating. Right now in COVID, it's hard not to ignore the family visitation issues. I mean, that one, we've really crystallized on and have been part of a network of many organizations calling for the same thing. And so that, I think, refers back to what you're talking about before, where, strength in numbers, and it makes it easy, I think, for government. It's like, okay, if all these organizations have a similar message, it's hard not to ignore, versus when people are all asking for different things.
That's really helpful. Christine, I want to go to you and draw about, have you had an experience in personal advocacy that has really been for you a success? Something that you advocated for that you really think, actually was a win? These days of COVID-19, I'm always looking for bright sides because there's so much that's hard and dark. Is there something, can you share a little bit about maybe a win that you felt that you had?
I think for me, there's been a few wins. For the organization I work with, Dementia Alliance International, we've been really striving to get the message out that organizations need to quit fighting each other and work together to the greater good. There is so much time spent competing, and they're forgetting what they're actually there for, which is to make these improvements and change policies and move things forward so that people with dementia actually get a better quality of life. So that's been a big win. We're seeing more of that happening. So that's on the level of our organization. That's a huge win. On a personal level, I think for me, it goes back to my days of working in long-term care and dementia care, and it will probably always be my biggest win. I fought the whole health system for the right for 2 people to die together. She was our resident who had dementia. He did not, but he came into our facility, became really ill while she was palliative. We ended up putting them together, created all kinds of policy problems. But at the end of the day, when the CEO said to me, "Why did you do it?" and go back to what Lisa said, it's about knowing when to do the right thing. And the right thing was to not have a man in a hospital dying and a woman in a facility and families running between 2 places, stressed out, costing the system all kinds of money, when it made sense to allow them to do the one thing they wanted to do, was to be together. So that was a huge change. that to me will always be my biggest win.
It's important that we have those wins. And a piece that I just wanted to share with you is, so often we look at this, mountain that we have to go up. And it's hard sometimes to take moments and celebrate when things actually have progressed in the way that we want. Part of what I want to talk about a little bit later on, I'll give you a cue, this is coming a little bit later on. I want to talk about, how you keep up the enthusiasm and how you keep up the drive, us all. But Kim, I want to come to you. In our chat, we're seeing some really interesting conversations about, person-centeredness, which I don't think anyone disagrees with. But the reality is, systems are systems. They're not really, the CRA, our tax code, it's not really person-centered. It is, however, important that each person pays their taxes, but it's not really about being person-centered. Our individual healthcare provision, that's a much easier conversation about being person-centered, because I think they're generally, that's a discourse that needs to happen. But sometimes we need to have change. And, our idea of what's really important, it's not really about that at their level. If you're going to have a conversation about changing the tax code for a caregiver tax credit, you can say the values and so on and so forth. But on the other end, it's a system. How do you navigate some of those challenging questions about bringing that person-centered advocacy forward, understanding that you're not going to make the tax code like a different thing?
Wow. The whole concept of person-centered care, as I'm seeing in the comments, a lot of people are like, yes, it's just buzzwords, and it for sure is. The long-term care system is really a system that, for staff, it loves a scapegoat and loves to say, okay, well, you didn't do this right, but we're going to ding you for it, because even though we didn't give you the support you needed. I think for person-centered care and changing long-term care at that level, I think there's things we can all agree on. Certain things like, that there has to be, it's always amazed that there has to be a resident's bill of rights for people living in long-term care. And the first right is the right to live with dignity. And it's like, if we have to spell that out, okay, let's actually do it. And so those sorts of things I think we can all agree on in terms of, but then what does that really look like? How do I specifically advocate for something that provides somebody in long-term care with dignity and respect?
Yeah. And so just building on part of that point is, what we're hearing about is tactics in advocacy as well, right? We talked a little bit about how to speak to government. We talked about how to bring the voice of persons with lived experience, understanding there's a cost to that as well. Christine, I really heard you say that that's there's a cost. But it is, I think, important, and certainly something that we take very seriously, is trying to find key areas of agreement. So I was on a call with a lot of other organizations yesterday. Kathy, you were on that call as well. And I said, here's 25 things that we're thinking about. Are there like 3 that we can all agree on? And if so, can we send a joint letter asking for those 3 things? It is more powerful, I think, to have 3 things. And Lisa, pulling on your point as well, where that impact is as well. Maybe I could just pull on that a little bit more and talk about the role of numbers. So I'm not an economist, but I know that how important it is to be able to talk about, the numbers in terms of cost benefit analysis, and you need to be able to talk about other numbers. So I'm going to give a big open question, and Lisa, maybe I'll start with you. You're unmuted, so that's why I'm going to you first. When you're wrestling with impact, how do you do that when we have limited resources and not everyone can do everything? How do you express the importance through numbers?
It's a great question. I think there's many different ways people can advocate, and people need to do what makes sense to them and is comfortable for them. I personally believe in the power of facts, and numbers don't lie. And I also think if you're speaking to someone in government, once again, if that's a person you need to try to convince to listen to your stories, they also deal in numbers. And so I think the numbers, I mean, these days with Google and we have such access to information that do your research. Like I think that being prepared and having some facts at hand to support anything you say is of critical importance. And if you aren't able to find the numbers you need, ask around, like university professors, Alzheimer societies, even your local representatives. They're all resources for people.
And I want to just build on that. I'm going to pull to you, Kathy, for just a second. But I often lead with facts. Like I'll start a conversation and say, so right now, one of our big issues is adult vaccinations, particularly in the time of COVID-19, particularly for people who have physical frailty or who are immune compromised, right? We want to make sure that they get the existing vaccines, not just hope for a COVID vaccine. So I'll lead with something like, it's nice to meet you today. Did you know only 3% of all Canadian seniors have all of their vaccinations up to date? And that usually sets the stage. Kathy, Alzheimer Society uses a lot of numbers. Yeah, what do you use? How do you think about it? And what are the most persuasive things that you kind of lead with or integrate?
Well, certainly we lead with the number of people who currently have dementia and the subsequent number of other people in their lives that are affected. It's a huge issue in our country and around the world. So that's obviously a very startling fact, but we try to bring it even closer to the person that we're talking to. And in terms of facts and numbers, we actually try to talk dollars. So when we're saying we want people in long-term care to be trained properly to interact with and provide care for people with dementia, it's really important to marry that up with, we know that studies say that when people receive proper training and provide care, use of medication decreases, incidences of responsive behavior decrease, falls, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to sort of demonstrate in a dollar way to show the government that, hey, an upfront investment in training or whatever else it is we're talking about will actually in the long term save the system money. Because when it comes to politicians, it's money that actually speaks. But I think it's really important. I've been watching the chat as well. Numbers are really important, and that's for us anyway, in the way that we do advocacy, that's our role. So when I'm there as the CEO of the Alzheimer Society, I provide the facts, I make the case for the return on the investment, but we partner with people with lived experience who tell the emotional side, the person side, why what we're talking about is so important. So I don't think you can really do one without the other. Politicians are humans, most certainly, and with regard to this topic, I mean, they all know somebody who has lived with dementia. So, pairing us up together as facts and emotion together, I think is a really effective way to get the message across.
Yeah, that's great. Let's talk about something where facts and emotion really come together. Let's talk about COVID. We can't not talk about COVID. And for some of us, we took our advocacy priorities and kind of threw them a little bit over our shoulder. I certainly took some of our key, topic areas that because the landscape we thought was perfectly ripe for this issue, and then COVID comes. And it's clear that because of the landscape change, we as an advocacy organization needed to nimbly shift with that landscape. And now we're thinking both about COVID in what I would call a vertical, like as its own thing, we're talking about it. What does it mean to people? But we're also thinking about it as a horizontal. So we're thinking about the landscape of advocacy within the time of COVID-19. So when I'm thinking about vaccines, I may be advocating for, high-dose flu vaccines or pneumonia vaccines, but I'm shaping it within the time of COVID-19. Why is it important now? It was always important, but why is it important now? If I'm thinking about long-term care, we always had these issues, but why is it important in the time of COVID-19? So I'm going to just ask kind of each one of you, if I may, to share with me some of how you or your organizations are kind of dealing with COVID-19. What have you seen are the most important issues, and have any of your advocacy priorities shifted? Who would like to take? Kim, I haven't called on you for a little while, so let's call on you first. So in the time of
Yeah, so one thing I did preparing for this is I went back and I reread the military report on long-term care. And as I'm watching the chat box go by with people talking about facts, but also lived experience, if you want to know why advocacy for making it better in long-term care is important, you just read some of the cockroaches, significant gross fecal contamination, force feeding to choking sounds, bleeding fungal infections from unsanitary catheter care, and sedating people with narcotics and benzodiazepines when there's not enough care. So if anything, my advocacy efforts are still focused on that care that a person with dementia is getting in the long-term care home. And it's just made it so much more important that we humanize dementia care and really start focusing on the fact that, yes, a person is older. Yes, a person might be living in a care facility, but my God, they're still a person.
Christine, let's pull to you. COVID-19. You're looking at your advocacy in these times. Can you share a little bit about your experiences around advocacy within the time of COVID-19?
For our organization, we, of course, aren't doing our traveling. We weren't at the UN this year. We weren't in Singapore. All of those things have sort of gone by the wayside. So everything is being done online, although we've always worked really hard with Zoom and online. So we were sort of more prepared than most organizations and people, because we're already equipped, because that's what we already do. And we instituted extra support groups because worldwide, people living with dementia needed that extra support because they're even more isolated than they already are. So we put in more support groups, and we ran more webinars and more cafes and more online cafes, that is. So we've upped all of those things, which has made a tremendous amount of extra work for those of us doing those things. But it's also given us the opportunity to really sit back and have some great conversations with all of the people living with dementia who join us around how COVID is impacting them. For most, they actually feel like their life has not changed that much. So that speaks of volumes to the rest of the world about what's not happening for people with dementia, when you really look at that picture. So that's a real big piece that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's really
the other thing that it did was there's been a lot of talk around all the long-term care issues that have come to light. And it's like, long-term care was better 15 years ago than it is today. It's gone backwards so far. And how did society be okay with that to start with?
Yeah.
Why hasn't that mattered until now? That's a real big question that everybody needs to be asking themselves and looking at themselves and going, why was that okay with me? Why was that never on my radar before?
Yeah, so your advocacy is also challenging individual peoples to really wrestle with these kinds of social issues. As we say, I can't tell you the number of times I said on media, when they asked me, are you shocked? And I said, no, I'm horrified, but am I shocked? No. And I said, and no one I know, and I'm looking at you and many of you who have joined us today, no one is really shocked because this is a thing that we've been kind of crying into the wind for. I want to pull on Kathleen's question here, and it's in the chat. Have you noticed a quicker response from politicians? Kathleen? Yes, I sure have. Oh my goodness, everyone's really, really eager to meet right now. Have you gotten more airtime? Yes, I was doing sort of 25 media hits a day on average for about a month and a half. And, no media day has been less than 2 to 3, I'd say, in 4 months. I mean, there's just, there's never been the attention, at least in my 25, 25, 30 years, whatever long it's been. Actually, it's been a long time. I've never, ever gotten this much airplay. And airplay and politician impact are not disconnected from each other. Kathy, what about you? You've been doing a lot, I know, talking about some of the key issues. Have you noticed that the pandemic for COVID-19 has given you a bit more in terms of oomph with policymakers and media?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the long-term care report from the military certainly it was like a grenade really into the system and really got people's attention. So yeah, absolutely. And our local societies across the province as well have actually been quite successful in getting meetings with MPPs. A lot of them obviously were home, and so able to connect. So yeah, it's been good in that way. I think, when you think, pre-COVID, I mean, I think it's absolutely shocking and tragic that the impact COVID has had in long-term care, I think probably came as a surprise to politicians. I think that was kind of an afterthought, which we have now seen the results of that in the number of people that have died in long-term care. So yeah, I mean, grateful for the military's report to really shine a light on it. I think it's really important also, I want to be balanced, and that report was showing some very extreme examples of bad care as a result of a number of factors. So it's not that necessarily people were awful in providing care. I think a confluence of factors have created those kinds of situations, but they're not uncommon. And we know, even when we think back to when long-term care was established, it was established as an institution. It was never established as a home-like environment. So I think we have to ask ourselves questions, going way back. Why would we have accepted that? Why are older people in general, and people with dementia even more so, why are they not considered and their quality of life right to the very end? So I think someone early in the chat actually talked about ageism as an issue, and I think that's one that we have to tackle head on.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to now head over to our chat. I've been answering some of the questions or calling out some of them and amalgamating them, but we've got some great questions in the chat. I'm happy to introduce to you Brett Book, who's our articled student and one of our policy officers. Brett's in Kamloops, BC, and he's been monitoring some of the questions. So Brett, do you want to pose some of the questions to our panelists? Hi, welcome to the speakers panel, Brett.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. I'd like to turn to a question that we received through email earlier, and this question comes from Mary. Mary wants to know, what would you say are the top three roadblocks that are encountered by those pushing for the voices to be heard of people suffering from dementia?
I can answer that.
And yeah, why don't you go straight to Christine? Come on, let's hear about it.
One of the biggest roadblocks, of course, is the financial aspect. Very often, we are left to try to do our own fundraising to get to conferences, and it's like, what? There's all these people paid to attend the conference through their organizations, and yet the very people that need to be there the most are not funded. And so there's a real breakdown there, and that needs to change in a big way. That's one of the key factors. The other key factor is ensuring that when there is opportunities, for example, even like today, which they did a great job, thank you, you guys. People like myself, we need many reminders. When we're traveling, we need extra time built in so that we can be properly rested. Otherwise, our brain doesn't produce what we need it to. We need extra things built in at conferences. We need a quiet room that we can go to before, during, and after different events that are part of that. So there's all these key things that, and so we need the people that are hosting these events and putting them together, or the research groups that are bringing us and wanting us to help and work with them, which we're all happy to do. That's how we make progress. We need them to come to us and say, how can we help you so that you can help us? And that's what needs to happen at this stage.
Thanks very much, Christine. Before we jump in, does anyone else want to just jump on top of that? Roadblocks. I'll jump on. I'll go, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to quickly say that one of the roadblocks are often when people, especially who are impacted by dementia, are sort of new to this whole world. They're tired, they're overwhelmed, they don't know how to find others who share their concerns. And I mean, it's an unbelievable thing, having experienced it personally, when you meet others who understand what you're experiencing and they validate that, you know, you're not just some crazy person with unrealistic expectations. It is just the most powerful experience ever.
Thanks very much. Brett, next question.
Thanks, Laura. This question comes from our Q&A chat. Kathleen, she has a question based on what Kim had spoken earlier, and she asks, Kim, you spoke to the role of the staff and those who provide care in long-term care. What is their role in advocacy? What strategies would help them engage as allies in the process of implementing changes within the system?
Thanks for that question. Empowering staff to take responsibility for and supporting them in a way that really, really, really makes them want to be there to do what they're doing. I think that, again, long-term care is not a system that's set up for success in terms of really being able to focus on empowering the people that really matter. I would say that if I'm able to go in and help staff understand a different way of approaching a person living with dementia that makes the day easier for both of them, then I think that staff member, as someone said earlier, you don't know what impact that person's going to have for the next 10 people that they're taking care of. And so I think, you know, the whole staffing issue for long-term care is huge right now. But I think being able to really empower people to feel that responsibility.
Can I jump in here for 1 second? So I think I agree with absolutely everything that's been said with regard to long-term care. But one of the things that we at the Alzheimer Society also spend a lot of time advocating for is that people generally don't want to go to long-term care. People want to age in place. People want to live out their days in an environment that's comfortable with the people around them who care for them. And so it's really important in advocacy also not to get distracted by the latest news story. I mean, absolutely, we should all be involved in the military report, but we equally, and at the Alzheimer Society, we're really focusing on, listen, you need to provide more support in the community so people can actually stay where they want to be. And you know, there's all kinds of facts and evidence that support that, and cost
and good numbers too. There's a lot of cost effectiveness as well, but also for sure quality of life. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, you know, we shouldn't just be focused on, oh, let's improve long-term care. We should be improving the quality of life for people with dementia wherever they want to be, and most of them want to be, just like the rest of us, want to be at home. So that's a really important point.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite, sorry, one of our policy officers, sorry, Christiane, my apologies, Zoom had a bit of a link. One of our policy officers, Megan. Megan has been waiting patiently, and she's one of our co-hosts today. Megan is finishing her Master's of Social Work with a specialty in gerontology and has worked for more than 7 years in long-term care systems and has been really dedicated to this area. And she's one of our great supports here. And I just wanted to make sure that Megan had a chance to pop on and say hello. Megan, do you have some questions for the panelists that you've been monitoring in your chat?
Yeah, I do actually. And so one question, we've been actually getting quite a few scenarios come in where people are asking questions about what do I do? And something that has come up is, how do we define essential caregivers? And I know that this is coming up in conversations more. And then how do we also advocate for caregivers as well?
we talk a lot in our organization about labels and language. And when you're advocating, the labels and language you're attaching is so important. And one of the things that most of us living with dementia don't like is this caregiver. When did marriages, all of a sudden, I have dementia, so this isn't my husband, he's now my caregiver. Wait a minute, no, he's my husband, who also provides care, which is a normal part of life. So we've labeled people, and in doing that, we've changed the dynamics of their relationship by, as society, labeling. So we have to be really careful with how we use labels and terminology, because it's very damaging and harmful. And I really liked what Kathy said about we need to not just look at long-term care. And I worked in long-term care. That was my career. I could say a lot about it. I'd rather not. I, as a person living with dementia, will do everything in my power to never go into long-term care until they get it right. And we are so far off of that, I'll be long gone before they do get it right, in my opinion. So being in the community is of the utmost importance. Having the rehabilitation and occupational therapy and all those different therapies that can help me maintain that, dollars need to be put there instead of a lot of other places, so that we can maintain people within the communities. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, it's exactly right. It's very inspiring, and it's so lovely to hear it from you. We're talking about personal advocacy. I just want to share that those types of stories, you know, I think they not only have extra weight, but they give the rest of the advocates purpose, right? And so there's always this tension between people with lived experience and people who are experts and people who are systems. And it's not an either or, right? It's an everyone together. But also wanted to acknowledge the emotional burden that it puts on people with lived experience to constantly be sharing their experience and to constantly have to do that emotional work that's in addition to all of the other types of work associated with it. So I just really want to acknowledge that. Megan, we have time for one more question before we do a bit of wrap up.
Okay, so I just have another question here from Kathleen, and she has asked, what is the role of advocacy in promoting the role of person-centered language at conferences and within materials?
Lisa, this looks like it's ready-made for you. What do you think?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, Kathleen, and language has power, and that I think for especially people who are plenary speakers or presenters, it's absolutely critical that they use appropriate language because people are learning from them. And so language is powerful. And so we need to encourage people, we need to advocate, as Christine was saying, for words like, you know, to get rid of words like suffering with dementia. We need to talk about people living with dementia. We need to talk about care partners rather than, you know, some people use caretakers. And so there's a lot of language that is very hurtful, that even though it's unintentional, once again, it gets back to education and awareness.
I think that's critically important. We probably have, one super fast question and fast answer. I want to squeeze in as many as possible. One more, Megan. Or Brett.
I just have kind of a general question from Shannon. Shannon is advocating on behalf of another individual and is having some difficulties communicating with the healthcare providers. I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any useful strategies for individuals who may be in similar situations.
Kim, this looks like it's a ready-made one for you. So you're in long-term care, you're trying to help with advocacy, you're trying to work with the healthcare providers. Some tips to support that conversation, which can be a real barrier.
Don't stop. you know, this is a lot of advocacy is just poke, 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 and you keep at it. It's hard sometimes. There's also, I'm not a lawyer, but there's also legal documents. Let's just say that the care home or the long-term care place is like, no, we can't talk to you because of X, Y, Z. There's some legal remedies available as well that might help the care facility be able to say, oh yeah, okay, now it's okay for you to talk to this individual because we have some legal proof that we're not going to get in trouble now. But I think overall, just don't stop, because it's so important what you're doing. And it's so important to support people in living the life that they want, that it's hard sometimes, but keep going.
Well, that is probably the very best way that we could finish this. And I'm just going to share with you a bit of an advanced view of some of the resources that are coming to you as follow-up. Now, the first and most important thing that you can do is fill out the very quick evaluation that will come. So this is an inaugural conversation, and we are also looking to explore other ways to support advocacy. So I'm going to ask that you, in your evaluation form, if you have topic ideas, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to put together resource kits as a full sort of webinar series about advocacy. So do feel free to quickly look into your evaluation. Part of it as our follow-up to you will be a number of links and slides. There's a number of resources and other webinars that are going to come to you. We'll share with you ways to connect with us and stay in touch with all of our organizations. Mostly what I want to do is thank you all today for being part of our important conversation. I want to thank each one of our panelists and our co-hosts for giving of their time today. I want to especially acknowledge the role of our team at CanAge and all of the other organizations that were involved in the creation of this. Thank you for coming. Please keep tuning in. If you have had a question that hasn't been answered, we promise you a follow-up with an answer. So don't think that any of that is getting lost. It's not. And do feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're here for you. What I'm hoping is stay strong, stay safe, stay well, take care of yourself, because we need all of your energy to move the needle on these important issues now, ever, and more than we ever had. Thank you for joining us for our first CanAge Conversations. Please join again soon. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, and goodbye to our panelists as well. Bye, everyone.